biodiversity in 2002. I am seeing a few mixed reports about the quality and so forth. Local vendors have started to set up little lodges and restaurants around the area, and it is on one of the city's highest points too, so it provides these views looking down over the city. But if you do wish to go and see this particular area, as I say, it was monkeys that really fled to the nearest sort of green refuge place in the city based on the development of the city. So again, you've had the city quadruple in its population. You're going to see a lot of urbanization and development here, and the green spaces are becoming a little bit fewer and further between, so the wildlife has flocked to this area just north of the city. Now, I also mentioned there is a beach section along the southern coastline there. You will see a number of these different resorts along this southern area. I wanted to put one of them in here that is seen as kind of really the most reputable of the lot, because if nothing else that I cover in this presentation is of an European building in existence south of the Sahara. So again, the oldest European constructed building south of the Sahara. It was first established as a trade settlement. The castle later became one of the important stops on the route of the Atlantic slave trade as well. So you're going to see this dark history of the slave trade through this Gulf of Guinea area. We're going to talk in a moment about the Cape Coast Castle as well, which is a little bit further along here. Now, over time, it's had quite an interesting history. After an unsuccessful attempt in 1596, the Dutch seized the fort from the Portuguese in 1637, and they took over all of this Portuguese Gold Coast in 1642. Now, the slave trade here continued under the Dutch until 1814, and in 1872, the Dutch Gold Coast, which included the fort here, became a possession of Great Britain. The Gold Coast, which is now present-day Ghana, gained its independence in 1957 from Britain, and then they took over control of the castle. Now, the castle is seen as this historic site, and it was actually a major filming location in Werner Herzog's 1987 drama film Cobra Verde as well, and it is part of this collection of sites that is this UNESCO World Heritage listing of different castles and forts along the Ghanaian coastline because of its testimony to the Atlantic slave trade. Now, the other one you'll find a little bit further along the coastline is the Cape Coast Castle. So this is another one that's part of that UNESCO listing here, and it's one that was sort of this former commercial site here, bought on this coast, built on this coast by European traders. It was again originally this Portuguese trading post. It was established in 1555, and it was originally named Cape Corso. However, in 1653, the Swedish Africa Company constructed a timber fort there. It was originally the center of trade for timber and of gold as well. This region, as far as its history, its background, and the role it plays, because where we arrive into is fairly close to this district of the city. There's a big lagoon that surrounds it as well, and there's actually a canal that a constructed canal that we actually arrive into, which then allows us to dock closer to the city. So you will see a range of modern architecture, historic architecture. This is Hotel Ivoire. There's a series of French influence here as well, mixed with African charm. You're going to see sites of the city museums. You're going to see religious architecture here. It is quite developed, but some things are a little bit spread out than others. But just to give you an idea on the layout of this particular city, it was once upon a time just a village. In 1898, this was just a village. It became a town in 1903, and a rail terminus was built the following year in 1904, and then that really started the development and expansion of this city. Now, I know there's a tour going to a place called Bingaville. Bingaville was actually the original capital of the French colony here. Abidjan succeeded Bingaville as that capital in 1934. It retained that position after the country's independence in 1960. However, the capital moved inland in 1983 to a town about 170 miles or 275 kilometers inland, and then Abidjan sort of fell back into place a little bit here on the kind of from a governmental standpoint, but it was this de facto capital of the country through until the 21st century because a lot of that infrastructure was moving further inland into the city. Now, the city became more into prominence again in the mid-20th century, because in 1950, a place called the Vridi Canal, which is where we're going to come in through on our way into Abidjan, that opened the lagoon. That is where I'll show you in a map here, opened up the lagoon to the sea, which meant that it really became this big hub for shipping, financial center developed here, and it really became this prominent city of French-speaking West Africa. Now, two other bridges were connected, so you're going to see in a moment maps. I'll show you Grand Bassam. Petit Bassam is also another island inland that runs along the side of the lagoon. Bridges have now been constructed to connect all of these islands together, and then you'll see the pathway going through to the coastline. So with the construction of the canal that opened the waterway out to the sea, this deep water port became very prominent with exports, things like cocoa, coffee's a big one, timber, bananas, pineapples, a lot of different products are now being exported out of this area. So I mentioned last night as well, there's about 14 different docking locations. I'm going to show you exactly where we do arrive into. It is quite a nice place that we do come into, and quite close to the downtown area of the city. So I'll come in the way of this in just a moment, but I'll move back. So as we come along, this area here is the Vridi Canal. This here is Petit Bassam. Grand Bassam is located over here. One of the major areas of focus for us is going to be Le Plateau, which sits just north of the cruise port area. This area here is the Ebri Lagoon. So this canal was constructed to allow shipping traffic from the sea to get into this area, which is really where it boosted up the ability to have this as a trade and export port of coal. That being said, this image was sent to me by the ship's navigation team. There's 14 different docking locations. Originally, when I was planning this presentation, I actually had us being just on the inside of the canal area. This probably makes more sense to you initially than it did to me. I was looking at this on day one of COVID quarantine. I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? What's going on? If I come back a slide, this canal goes up. So that map should be vertical. Does that make sense? So I'm looking at it like as if we were coming from the bottom coming up here. I'm like, the land doesn't look like this. Google's lying to me. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that took me 45 minutes to figure out. So that's my moment of self-deprecation for the day. But number one is where we're scheduled to dock. So that's, you can't really get much closer to the downtown area than where we're scheduled to. So if I show you that area and the next image, this is it sort of zoomed in a little bit. So this is where the cruise port area is scheduled to be. So we are in this really great location. If you research this port in advance and you'll see where cruise ships used to dock in the past for this port, it's nowhere near as close as where we're currently scheduled to. So I do always list subject to change, because these things do have the ability to change. But as of right now, we're looking pretty good as far as being quite close to Le Plateau, which is really this major downtown area of the city. So every time I show photos so far of the city, that's the area I'm showing. So this is St. Paul's Cathedral here. We're going to talk a little bit about that area, because there's a series of different museums, there's high-rises, the sports stadiums there, some interesting other architecture, and there'll also be a shuttle service going into Le Plateau for the independent travelers as well. So we're going to talk about that area. One thing I must say though is, when we talked about Takoradi, we talked about a city of 1 million. Abidjan, over 5 million people in the greater area of the city. Wow. It's a big area. Anytime you go to a city of 5 million people, not everything's going to be right next door to each other. So some things are close together, some things are further away and do take transport. It's just the nature of a bigger, spread out area. So we're going to take a bit of a tour through this city area. So again, looking at the grand scheme of the area of Abidjan, we get to come in through the Vridi Canal, up through the lagoon, and dock quite close to the downtown area, which is really seen as Le Plateau. I will touch on Petit Bassam in a moment too, because there's a fascinating arts and crafts market here as well. But if we focus on that area north, Le Plateau first and foremost, that's where you're going to see a lot of the development, let's say kind of the more central business district of the city area. So you'll see interesting architecture. It's where you're going to find a lot of the kind of upmarket restaurants and bakeries and so forth. Distance from where we dock to the heart of Le Plateau, while it does look very close here, it's still about 1.5 miles or 2.4 kilometers. So it is just a little bit of a distance coming up here. And as I say, there will be a shuttle service available. So let's take a little look through this area. So first and foremost, St. Paul's Cathedral. I put this first because it does somewhat dominate the city skyline a little bit here. It was actually designed by an Italian architect who was commissioned by Côte d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast's first president, to really build this. He was kind of hired as the artistic force to build it. It covers 8,500 acres too. So it's a big national park, 8 miles, 14 kilometers north of the city. All right, so I better get through this one as well. Let's get into some of the practical information. 2 miles, so about 3.5 kilometers. Google says an 11-minute drive. I always think you should play it a little bit safer with that one, probably 15 to 20 based on traffic coming across the bridge there. So there will be shuttle services for both of these ports. The one thing to note though that's important about this one is it's not that easy to source buses here. So while there is a shuttle bus, I believe there's only 3 buses available to run these shuttle services. So some ports we sometimes have 5, 6, 7 or 8 shuttle buses. They only are able to get 3 buses at this stage. So if you are relying on these shuttle services, there might just be a little bit of wait time in between just because of the availability of buses for that shuttle. All right, weather forecast, expecting pretty much the same in Takoradi and Abidjan there. So 31 Celsius, 88 Fahrenheit, slightly warmer there. But again, expecting to be an overcast day. All right, 3 minutes. West African CFA franc is the currency here. So the CFA franc, this is a holdover from the French colonial period too, because this is actually the currency of 8 different countries. There's a West African one, and then there's the sort of the standard CFA franc as well. It was introduced following World War II, and it is tied to the euro. So the rate of exchange between the West African franc and the euro doesn't change, but it does for the other currencies. So it's always tied to that 655.95 to the euro, but that just gives you a ballpark figure as to the exchange to some of these other currencies. So depending on how you plan on spending your time, this might be a day where you may need some local currency, especially if you're going into the city and you want to try a local restaurant or a bakery item or these types of things. You may need some. A lot of these modern parts of the downtown area of the city, they will accept credit cards.
Trying to catch the 0-0 moment, I'd like to point out that the accuracy of the GPS is several meters, and it is very unlikely that it will be like 0-0-0-0-0-0.
Hey.
There probably is a 1 in there somewhere. But the accuracy of the position is such that I can guarantee you that the spot will go somewhere through our ship. And I can safely say that we will all pass this point. You know, it's not going to be on the centimeter. Although our navigator is currently only 40 centimeters off track, according to our equipment. And the plan is to sail straight through the point and blow the whistle. We will not stop because it will be even harder to find the spot with the swell, and the ship will be rolling a little bit and the sensor is moving around. So we keep it steady, and once we pass through this point in a few minutes time, I shall blow the whistle and I shall make another announcement. Enjoy the moment of going through a point in the middle of nowhere with nothing to see but water. Thank you.
Nowhere.
Passed through the point of 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude. And I can now, on behalf of the ruler of the 7 seas, the lord of boundless waves, the mistress of the mist, master of the tides, and regent of the recesses of the deep,
Em làm gì nè, longitude ba làm ngang, hiểu không?
receive the title Trusted Emerald Shellbacks. Enjoy the rest of your morning.
Get out of the way. One, get out of the way. Screaming loose. Okay, 1, 2, 3, Emerald Shellback.
Don't say the other one.
and I did an actual. I actually didn't drop a pin, but I dropped a pin where it said 00 was. So on the maps.me, if you search for 00.
We see tombs like this that were also of the same style. And in this area now is where we're going to be focusing, is the Niger River, and we have the famous city of Timbuktu on the bend of the Niger River. And why was it here? Because the legend goes that the traders across the Sahara, when they went in their caravans, the people coming from the Middle East had to leave their things in various places so that on their way back they could pick them up. They didn't want the camels carrying them all the way down and then all the way up. That was a waste. And so there is a story of a woman who was a Tuareg woman, and she then said to people, I will take care of your things, I will build a warehouse. And she was known to be a very dependable and honest person, and from her came to her warehouse is what the name Timbuktu comes from. Tin being the same as Tin Hinan, who is the ancestress of the Tuareg. But there's another story also that Timbuktu is the faraway land, and it could be that that's where the name came from as well. But it was known as a stopover in the route, the caravan routes going across from the Middle East to the gold and salt mines of West Africa. And in the site of Kumba Saleh is the site of Old Ghana. And what you will hear, and you will probably hear this from the guides that will talk to you about a little bit about history, they say there's these empires of Ghana, Jena, and Gao, and Timbuktu, but they have nothing to do with the modern empires. Mali was a huge empire. That is not true. That is a bunch of crock. Because these people who are living there today are the descendants of the people who built those empires. I mean, it's like the Roman Empire. Britain has inherited its legal system from the Roman Empire. Britain was part of the empire, but it's like saying Britain has nothing to do with the Roman Empire. The United States, our legal system is inherited from Britain, which is inherited from the Roman Empire. But there's always been this anti-intellectual element running through African history, that Africans were not allowed to have a civilization. They were not allowed to be credited with the achievements that other people in other societies, and that was part of a political system. In anthropology, the same thing was true. Some of the greatest anthropologists, greatest so to speak, when I first started anthropology were the Brits with these Evans Pritchard and such. They have little hyphenated names. And it wasn't until later I found out what these people were like. Most of them were sitting in Kenya, drinking gin and tonics on their porches and taking notes from their servants. And interestingly enough, when I worked on adventure ships, I was on a ship, one small ship, and we were at dinner, and a lady I was sitting with said, have you ever heard of the anthropologist Evans Pritchard? I said, yes, of course. I mean, he's one of the classics on The Nuer, which is what, like the Maasai that I showed you before, they were the cattle people of Kenya. I said, yeah, he's one of the classics. This is one of the people we read first when we get into anthropology. She said, well, I grew up with his daughter. I said, ooh, tell me the story. Well, apparently, Evans Pritchard beat his wife. She left him, and he had a daughter, and he was a drunk, and his daughter was taken away from him. She was abandoned by her mother, apparently. I don't remember that part of the story. And she grew up with this woman that I was traveling with. So this is the great anthropologist, just one of them. And these were the colonial officers that ran the African colonies for the British. So they were not too happy about giving credit to locals for anything, because after all, if you give too much credit to the locals, they may get uppity, and they may think that, you know, they may think that we're not as good as we think we are. And there had to be a hierarchy, an order maintained, especially in the British colonies, a little bit different in the French and the Portuguese colonies. And so you got the suppression of information and the suppression of archaeology in particular, because archaeology exposes people's ingenuity. And this is not just something that happened in Africa. When I started in Tikal in Central America, working in Central America, one of the things I remember was I was introduced to Bill Coe, who was running the Tikal project, and as I got upstairs in the University Museum, I heard this yelling. He said, but it was autochthonous development. In other words, Tikal, he had been arguing that Tikal had been developed in the past by people who were Maya and who lived there, and there was a whole school of thought that was arguing against that, saying that this civilization was developed somewhere else, and then the Maya got it, because the Maya couldn't possibly have created a civilization. This was the 40s, the 50s that we had to deal with. So that is one of the things that has colored the archaeological and historical sciences of a number of places, and it is particularly evident here because to correct it, you have to go out and you have to dig and you have to write, and there isn't the money to do that, especially right now. There is plenty of money, but it's not going toward education, it's not going toward food, it's not going toward health care, it's going elsewhere. But what you will see is that this is the area of the major civilizations of the West Africa, and again, it is based on the Niger River and the bend in the river right here where you had Timbuktu and Gao, and these are the areas that flooded. Now these civilizations are not at all, if you want to read something on the history of Ghana, I did find a couple of new books. And there's one written, the Archaeology of Ghana was written this year. I didn't take a picture of it, but this is one that was written very recently, 2014, and it summarizes all of the archaeological work and the historical work that was done on Ghana. Now, these civilizations that developed were different from the civilizations that developed elsewhere. And there's a couple, the Macintoshes, who have worked here in the 40s, 50s, or no, later than that, into the 70s and 80s. And they have called these cities without citadels. They are not at all made on or they weren't developed on the European model. The European model is always having a citadel or a castle in the middle of a population area, and then the people, when they're attacked, they go inside the castle walls. There's a central keep. This is not these aren't defensive cities. These are trading centers. They're like caravanserais. And this is where their intellectual development happened. These were also where libraries were developed, schools were developed, and religious centers, and in particular Islamic religious centers in this particular area. And this is the bend in the river, the bend in the Niger River, and it shows all of the different cities that are without citadels. These are trading cities that became very wealthy all along that whole river basin and down to Benin and all the way to Nigeria. One of the earliest is the area of Nok and the civilization of Nok. And today it is being researched and excavated, and not much is available of the city because it was ransacked. It was ransacked by the Europeans for its figurines that sell for tremendous prices, and except that they recently found these walls. They don't know yet how the walls are intersect or interact with each other even, or what kind of society these were created for. But it is a beginning of the surveys and for the intellectual development of this area, developing its history. Nok figurines are in very high demand by collectors. Europeans really like them, so there's a lot of illicit trade going on. And the illicit trade is regrettable but understandable. And the same thing in Central America and other areas where poor countries. If you can find something like this and sell it, you can get a couple $100 for it. You can feed your family for quite a while. But when it gets onto the European market, this is in the museum, in one of the museums. I don't know if it's in the British Museum or not, but this is a figurine that would sell for several $1 million now in various ways. These are Nok figurines, and because of the ransacking of this site, it has never been properly excavated, so we don't really know what the civilization was based on, and we don't know what its economic base was all about. So we end up with the empires, the few empires that we do know about on the bend of the river. We have the Nok civilization, which actually goes way beyond 1000 BC. On this one it says 1000, but it goes earlier. Then we have the civilization of the Ghana Empire. And the Ghana Empire, this is one of the places, one of the sites, Tichet Walata, which is was one of the, it's now located in Mauritania. Mauritania, you know the country of Mauritania, the king of Mauritania was one part of the Roman Empire, and I think in the era of Augustus gave it to to the king, who gave it the name Maurus. Mavro in Greek means black. And we have a wine that's called Mafrodaphne. It is a very dark red grape that is almost a black wine. Interestingly enough, Mavro, who was given this by Augustus, was married to Cleopatra's sister, Berenice, and she became the queen of Mauritania. This is now located in the area of Mauritania. It is not excavated. It is obviously made of stone. It's very hard to find good pictures of it, and I'm sorry, this one is not the best of pictures, but it is a very, very large site, and it is connected to several other urban centers, but they're urban in a very different way from what we think of as European centers. These are clusters of population. We don't know what the economic base is, but we do know that they were trading centers because they are on the trading routes. Here are the three major empires that we're dealing with. These aren't the only empires. These are just the three that I picked out because they're the most prominent in West Africa, and these are the ones, if you hear about it, your guide is going to say, but it has nothing to do with today's civilizations, today's people. Yes, it does. These are today's people, are the descendants of these people, and they have inherited from them part of the culture that they have to this day. And then you get up to 1600, you have Songhai, and then you get the conquests from outside. So here are those civilizations, one after the other. It's very difficult to make sense out of how they operated and how they interacted. It is, there were times when they fought, but they are not encircled by defensive walls in the way that the Europeans are. So you will see names like Agadez, Gao, Timbuktu, Jenne, and I have beads from Jenne that I ordered that came from somewhere near there. I don't know if they are old or new or whatever, but they do come from that area. There were many other civilizations all through Africa, and most of them, or none of them, have really been properly excavated, and those that have been excavated have been left pretty much holes in the ground, and very little has been written about them. The kingdom of Monomotapa was actually razed to the ground because the governor at the time did not want any evidence that a local population had created a civilization. So what he had when the students came back to him, this was in the 1930s, I believe, and when students came back with him with trade goods, silks and such, that were pieces left in the ground from India and from the trade across to the east, he had the whole site scraped and all the dirt thrown out. Later, archaeologists came and they did sifting, and they did find evidence of gold, little gold, and I think there's a little gold hippopotamus that is you can see on that was survived from this site. But that was pretty much the history in the area of West Africa and of the area of African history in general. These sites then on the West African side were connected to the trade routes that I mentioned before, and the camel caravans that came from the east and west. So they were centers of information. When you have traders, traders bring, they bring religion and they bring intellectual information. Traders and merchants generally come first, and then comes the intellectual exchange comes afterward. So and the exchange works both ways. It doesn't just work one way, it works both ways. And these caravans crossing the Sahara would bring culture and information from the Middle East and would take culture and information back from the West. except that because of the prejudice against the African, sub-Saharan African cultures, that was not as well recorded as the other way around. So we don't know as much about it, but hopefully in the future we'll be able to do more research and excavation. And you have the trade that I talked about in the salt and the gold, and these centers, that is why they were centers without citadels, cities without citadels, is because they were based on trade. And trade is only flourishes if you don't have people fighting each other. And yet, there is always some warfare. Now, the center of the Ghana Empire was Ouagadougou, which I told you I mentioned, and this is the archaeological site of Ouagadougou and the gold. It's not gold that is excavated from veins, but it's gold that is washed up, and there is still apparently gold there. The city's center is called Kumbesale, and remains an archaeological site, although it is not being studied or excavated to this day. And there is a lute, a song, West African epic poem that says, 4 times Ouagadougou rose, a great city gleaming in the light of day. 4 times Ouagadougou fell and disappeared from human sight. Once through vanity, once through dishonesty, once through greed, once through discord. And what this shows you, the few little scraps of intellectual archaeology, is that there is more behind it. There is more that has been forgotten and more that has been erased. And then you had the influx with the merchants. You had the influx of the Islamic religion and Islamic culture, and that's where you get the Islamic literature and the books that were brought into this area because of the salt and the gold. And these are the salt mines that still exist to this day. These are salt mines that originally date back probably 3,000, 4,000, maybe more years. Today they are an area of contention because they are accused of using slave labor. And the UN is involved in the human rights issue of the workers, who are the workers and how they operate. But the salt is still mined and excavated and still shipped all over West Africa to this day. And I showed you the caravans. It is still transported in exactly the same way as it was transported 2,000 years ago, sent by river down to Mopti, and from Mopti it is then transferred all over the West African and the Saharan area. These areas here are the stop, the oasis stops along the caravan route that still exists to this day. But unfortunately, because of the way that the Sahara is drying up, these oases are also drying up, and so the routes are in danger. But Timbuktu is still a stopover on the route, and this is what the gold mines that pay for the salt look like today. And again, the gold mines are also a bone of contention because they also have been accused of using slave labor. in their workforce, but it is still that trade continues. The gold from this area, not from Kumbesala, that is placer gold, that's gold that washes out. This is actually mined gold, and it is known as the purest gold in the world still to this day, and it is mined throughout the sub-Saharan area. So what we have is this Western African area where you still have the trade going on, the salt and the gold, on top of cultural change that is taking underneath it and that has altered the way the society operates. But this is nothing new. Society is constantly being altered. New ideas are coming in, and remember I said that merchants bring in new ideas, and of course the Saharan trade brought in Islam. And Islam, these are the green areas, are the areas where the Islam has taken hold, and with Islam has come the Arabic language as a written language. People still speak their native languages, but when they write in Arabic. And anyone who knows something about Arabic knows that Arabic also has two forms of its own language, if not more. It has a written language and it has a spoken language. If you write a letter to your parents, you write it in the written language. If you are speaking to your parents, you speak in the spoken language. So what you have now is the introduction of written language all through northern Africa. And the written language isn't the spoken language. So now you have a superimposition of the culture that is spread from 632, which is when Muhammad introduced Islam into the Eastern European and Asiatic area. Now, when the Islamic traders first came through, they came through for trade in camels, but when they do warfare, they do warfare on horses. But the horses don't survive south of the Niger River. So all of the warfare is pretty much limited to the Niger River and further north. And that is as far as Islam ever went. It just sort of went to that bend in Africa, and then it didn't trickle into the south, because for one thing, there was nothing there to trade as far as the Middle East was concerned, and there was, they couldn't get to it because camels don't fight. They had to bring their horses, and the horses don't survive in the subtropical area. Diamonds are also found in this area to the south, but diamonds have only recently become valuable. They only became valuable probably in the around 1870 or so, because it introduced by Cecil Rhodes and the De Beers Company. And until they could cut the diamonds into facets, diamond just looks like a rock made of glass. So that southern area was pretty much left alone because it didn't have anything to offer to the northern traders. But where the center of Western African civilization was on that Niger River, because like the Mediterranean, that was where all the cultures could meet, and that was where there was an exchange of ideas. That was where you got literacy coming in, and that's where you got the flooding of the river, so you have plenty of food and plenty of resources. And this is from the air. I took this picture This is Timbuktu and what it looks like from the air. So you can see from that the city has no defensive walls and has no real citadel. It is made out of adobe, and they have to reinforce it with pieces of wood, and it has to constantly be upgraded. All of the buildings do, because there are occasional rains. They're rare, but they're occasional, and they are strong, and these are not cement buildings, so they will disintegrate. They also disintegrate in the wind. Timbuktu is known for its different types of decorative arts, and because it's Islamic, there can't be human and animal figures, and so the effort is put into the buildings themselves and the decoration of the buildings and the use of Arabic within the buildings. And this shows you where Timbuktu is, that it is a Tuareg city on these trade routes, and this is a center of civilization, because this is where you get the different ecological zones coming together, and you have the resources where people, there are many stories. They do not necessarily relate one to the other. And there are stories of the different kingdoms and the different empires. The story of Sundiata Keita is a poem and a song. And I wanted to get a clip to show you from it, but I didn't have a handy 10-year-old around, so I couldn't download. But the interesting thing about all of these stories of the West African heroes is they all start out either handicapped or ill in some way, and they overcome great difficulties, and they become heroes in the end. The story of Sundiata Keita, of course, also all those stories have, the guys have mothers, and the mothers are in the stories. His mother was a hunchback, and she was married to a king who didn't like her, didn't want her. Her son was sickly, he couldn't walk, and he overcame his handicap and eventually became a hero who unified the West African tribes and went on to lead them to create this empire. And of course, I was telling you how they used the horses in the Empire of Mali, particularly for warfare, because camels will not fight. In this sub-Saharan area, you don't have, things are not written down. This was not an area with reading and writing until Islam came along. And to this day, you have the tradition of the bard, and the history is repeated in the tradition. And you can hear it's online, the story of Sundiata Keita, and they actually sing in their local language, and then they translate it into English so that everybody can hear and understand the story. Timbuktu then became a famous center of learning. It is still one of the major ancient libraries of the world. It has an incredible collection of books that the Islamic fundamentalists have recently attacked. They tried to burn it down, and it was protected by the UN, and they have moved in computers and are trying to preserve them and to scan these books. And one of the stories of a patron of Timbuktu is Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was, this story was written actually in Spain, because Spain had been conquered by the North Africans. And this is the story of the richest man on earth. He had so much gold that when he made his trek, from a leaf from that book, he made his trek to Mecca. he gave out gold and threw it in the streets. Up to, it is said that he may have had up to 60,000 people in his retinue, in his camel train as he went. He actually did a disservice to his people, and that is that he brought attention to the tremendous amount of wealth, and then other people went in and tried to take it away. But this is a woodcut of his trek to cross the Sahara to Mecca. Mansa Musa also started, there's a movie, several movies on Sundiata Keita and on Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa also started out with a handicap. He was a sickly child, one of 12 children. There were several women his father had. Mansa is a title. And he was spared. His brothers were all killed by an enemy. He himself was spared because he was so sickly, and eventually he ended up conquering the whole area and took over the Mali Empire. And and Sundiata Keita's genealogy has been recreated. And as you can see, there's Sundiata Keita up there, Mansa Musa. How the two are related is not totally known, but you get them taking over these areas that were ancient civilizations, and this is in the medieval period. And here he is, this is Sundiata Keita, and he's the 10th ruler of the Mali Empire during the 14th century, and I believe that there is a movie of his life that was made in West Africa recently. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all at those who want to talk about beads, take a look at beads.
Today is the November 4th, 2022. The ship approaching Takoradi, Ghana. In front of Takoradi. We arrived in Takoradi, Ghana. First time we've been here.
For the tour, and you know the big shopping area. Seems like a lot of things are far away. I mean, you think that's how things go. It's worth getting up to check.
See you a little later. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yep.
Wow. So, we'll see.
Okay.
Do you need anything?
Sorry?
Do you need anything? Yeah. They're all cute. Every one of them. Yeah, we're more than welcome to see y'all. Thank you. I got nothing.
Today is the December 4th, 2022. The ship arrives Takoradi, the city of Ghana in Africa. This is the flag of Ghana. Ship docking.
Đây là North Africa Tour and Travel đó, cái tour này nó ba đừng thâu nữa ba.
Có gì đâu, trời ơi.
Đã thấy dặn rồi à. Hôm trước mình đi cái gì đó, cái Chazoni Park cũng xa chứ đâu có gần đâu. Và trong cái park đó đó, nó có nhiều cái activity trọng lắm, nó có cái dance, traditional dance trong đó nè.
Trong nào?
Ở trong cái bạc đó đó.
Bạc nào?
Cái bạc mà 2 tiếng đó, mấy là người local người ta extract cái oil á để người ta làm coconut oil. And then nó có cái gì, nó có cái suspension bridge, nó làm cái cầu ở trên mấy cái cây á. Nó rất là hay. That's the reason why mẹ muốn đi.
Yes, Monkey Hill.
Monkey Hill. Okay.
Cái này thật ra nó không phải là cái monkey park đâu, nó chỉ đem mấy cái con
Nữa.
một cái chân cao. Giờ nó nắng nó trốn hết rồi. Ai cũng tới Monkey Hill mà không có monkey.
They are all very friendly.
Huh?
The Chinese, they are all very friendly.
Friendly?
Yes.
A lot of taxi here, huh?
Yes.
That's your car? Your company?
Yes.
Your?
It's my car.
Oh, your car?
Yes.
Not a company?
No.
Oh, okay. You rich?
Oh no, I'm not with that.
Con mới chạy chờ đâu biết ở đâu nữa mà đi bộ lại nó hỏi có xa. biết. Chưa biết có cưỡi heo đâu đi bộ.
Thằng nó nói rồi, nó để cái mình con monkey thương thôi. Con monkey kia nó đặc biệt. Con monkey kia nó lạ lắm, nó có cái lưng nó màu đỏ, còn con này giống như thương monkey thường.
You didn't manage the Ghana way.
Huh?
You didn't manage the Ghana way.
Oh.
Took the money.
Yes.
What's his name?
Oh. President Nana Akufo-Addo.
Huh?
Yeah.
Ecuador.
Ecuador.
Oh, Akufo.
Akufo-Addo.
Oh. How long? How long are you president already?
6 years.
6 years?
Yes.
How many more years?
Yes, 2 years.
2 more years?
Yes.
And election?
No. Yes.
Election?
Yes.
Oh. So you will?
One term for 4 years.
Oh, one
And
term.
another, this is the second term.
Oh, second term?
Yes.
No more?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
After that,
No more? Go home?
yes.
But in the 8 years, he take a lot of money already.
Oh.
Because your country is very rich in gold, diamond.
Plenty. Raw materials.
Yeah, a lot of money.
No, it's too much.
Gold,
Gold,
diamond, right?
diamond.
Yeah.
It's still all the money.
That,
Yeah.
Where you go?
Akufo-Addo.
You go hit pocket. Oh man. No good. So you won't vote for him again?
Yes.
Okay.
But then maybe he can if he be crooked, he will buy the votes,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
He give the money
yes,
for
yes,
the people.
yes.
Yeah.
That is.
He buy the votes.
Yes. Always.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, that people good.
Yeah, very good. Better than Angola.
Okay.
Angola. You know Angola?
No good.
No, I hear.
Angola.
They are confusing.
Angola and Mozambique, no
Okay.
good.
No good at all.
Oh,
Yeah, no good.
Phùa.
Mấy đứa này nhìn nó có vẻ hiền.
Hiền. Nó phùa quá.
Đây nha, bên tay trái nè, nhìn là thấy ông ghê không? Ông quay vô đi.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What is
It's
traditional? Traditional is
Tradition is they are the people who worship gods.
okay. They're like the saint and
Yes.
But do you believe in voodoo? Voodoo?
I believe in Christian.
Yeah, Christian.
I'm Christian.
You believe in God?
Yes.
Yeah, everyone should believe in God.
God, yes.
To hopefully one of the UNESCO
Oh,
place.
military
for
space.
orange.
Yes.
Village.
There's the fourth
For orange.
Yes.
Okay, sir. Hello, sir. This is one we committed one of the UNESCO site.
This one not UNESCO, right?
Yes.
Huh?
The fourth.
Oh, yeah.
You detach yourself and you follow your own way, then you will not live as He wants you to live. Hallelujah. A day is coming when the Son of Man shall come back in His glory and He shall execute judgment.
Nghe music nữa.
Our ship is over there.
Hả?
You see our ship?
Yeah. You tour guide?
Yeah.
Oh, look like can tell.
Mete sɛ abɔfoɔ ɛka se no se obi nyare ɛwɔ ha. Jesus, ebi a wonyare fa wo nsa to hɔ. Fa wo nsa ka mi, Yesu. Fa wo nsa ka mi, Yesu.
sɛ Ezekiel koraa atumi kasa mframa kɛseɛ bi ɛpɔ deɛ ne nida so asam Nyankopɔn ayɛ no foforɔ Kada brando sadada bahata Yitorobo sihata Intalaba sota Karibodobo sai Bibi isi ewo sunsun Asoma bi kansa ne fɛnfɔ nyaa pɔnmu akɔ na ɛnɛ no bɛtumi asi kaa no bɛtumi atɔ bi ama memeyere ana meɛnkasa mo bɛtumi atɔ bi atwi ana Nyankopɔn asɛm nka nkyɛw sɛ ɛnkyɛ 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 ɔbɛsesa Jesus malabada Chimalabosu talabradadosa Intalabradosa We give you all the glory Jesus mighty name we pray Amen.
Yes, amen. Meditative prayer, please let's keep our eyes closed. Let's keep our eyes closed. We thank you, Master and our God, for being present in this atmosphere. Jesus, we have lifted an altar of praise and worship to you. The word says that you inhabit the praise of your people. Jesus, this morning, even as we have lifted it to you, we know that you have been with us, Jesus. And for some of us here, I want to encourage those of us who do not have a personal relationship with the Lord Jesus, with all eyes closed. Please, if you know that your heart is yearning to have that relationship with Him, please.
Do you know about the Tama plant? Tama plant?
No.
It's there.
Okay.
Oh yeah?
Tama plant is big.
Oh yeah? Tama plant?
Yes.
Oh.
So after that we go there.
Okay. Đi mà tối nay cái vô trong jewelry shop của mày chết rồi. Không biết được gì hết. Ông nói vậy ông không biết là tại ông đọc sách đó. Đọc sách làm sao mà đọc sách thôi, ở nhà đọc sách cho rồi. Đây này chợ của nó nè. These are local market, right? Supermarket?
Yes. It's black market.
Oh, black market. Fish.
Cá không à.
Rabbit okay too. Hey, okay, so turn it go get too. But you saw to children, but they are the trainer. You know money.
Oh.
You want to
see the black?
I did.
Hey, let it go.
Cái này ở đây nó có nhiều không?
Không gì. Đâu đây
Ghê lắm hả?
Nó cũng là bạn hả?
Nói theo tưởng cái chỗ này giống tưởng như Madagascar.
Bên đây nice lắm.
Từ này